1. Right view. Introduction. The Buddha taught that right understanding, or right view, is the forerunner on the path to liberation. He assigned right view to the position of first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path, the way to the end of suffering, and held that all the other factors of the path must be guided by right view toward the goal of his teaching, the cessation of suffering. For the Buddha, however, right view plays a critical role, not only on the path to liberation, but also in the attainment of well-being and happiness within the cycle of rebirths. It does this by underscoring the need for ethical conduct. The type of right view integral to the moral life is sometimes called mundane right view, Lokiya Sammaditthi, or the right view of one's personal responsibility for one's deeds, Kammasakata Sammaditthi. This kind of right view is based on the premise that there is an objective, transcendent basis for morality that is not dependent on human judgments and opinions. Through his enlightenment, the Buddha discovered this moral law and derived from it the specific ethical injunctions of his teaching. On the basis of this discovery, the Buddha holds that the validity of moral distinctions is built into the fabric of the cosmos. Moral judgments can be distinguished as true and false, actions determined as good and bad, with reference to a moral law that is just as efficacious, just as universal in its operation as the laws of physics and chemistry. As moral agents, therefore, we cannot justify our actions simply by appeal to personal preferences, nor can we expect following our preferences to secure our well-being. Rather, to achieve true well-being, we must act in conformity with the moral law, which is the Dhamma itself, the fundamental principle of truth and goodness that abides, whether or not Buddhas discover it and reveal it. Right view affirms that our morally significant actions have consequences that can bring us either happiness or misery. Our deeds create karma, a force with the potential to produce results that correspond to the ethical quality of the original action. Karma brings forth fruits, retributive consequences that reflect the actions from which they spring. The basic principle that underlies the working of karma is that good deeds bring desirable fruits, conducing to good fortune and happiness, while evil deeds bring undesirable fruits, leading to misfortune and suffering. Thus, the results of our volitional deeds are not limited to their immediately visible effects. Those that spring from purely naturalistic chains of causation. There is an invisible principle of moral causation operating behind the scenes such that, with the passage of time, whether long or short, our actions eventually return to us and determine our destiny in this life and in future lives. The Buddha contrasts right view of the efficacy of karma with three types of wrong view that were promulgated by iconoclastic thinkers of his age. Note 1. One type of wrong view, called the doctrine of moral nihilism, Nati Kaviyeta, denies personal survival beyond death. and says that there are no fruits of our good and bad deeds. At death, both the foolish and the wise are utterly annihilated, leaving behind only a physical corpse, a second kind of wrong view, called the doctrine of non-doing. Akiriyaviyata denies that there is a valid basis for making moral distinctions. Those who engage in such horrific deeds as slaughtering and tormenting others cannot be said to be doing wrong. Those who give generously and protect the helpless cannot be said to be acting rightly. The distinction between evil deeds and meritorious deeds is a human fabrication, purely subjective, and thus moral judgments are mere projections of personal opinions. The third type of wrong view, called the doctrine of non-causality, ahitakaviyata, proclaims that there is no cause or reason for the defilement of beings, and no cause or reason for the purification of beings. Beings are defiled and purified without any cause. They do not have moral agency, the capacity to determine their own destiny, but are compelled to act as they do by fate, circumstance, and nature. The Buddha expounded his conception of right view as the response to these three types of wrong view. He taught that personal identity survives bodily death, and the form we assume in each existence is determined by our karma. Living beings pass through a beginningless series of rebirths, in the course of which they reap the fruits of their good and bad deeds. The fact that our own deeds return to us thus provides a strong incentive to abstain from evil and pursue the good. In contrast to the doctrine of non-doing, the Buddha held that moral judgments are not arbitrary. They have an objective basis, so that certain actions, such as killing and stealing, can be rightly described as evil, while other types of conduct, such as giving and moral restraint, can be rightly described as good. And the Buddha held that there are indeed causes for the defilement and purification of beings. People are not driven helplessly by fate, but have the capacity for self-determination. Through heedlessness we defile ourselves, and by diligent effort we can purify ourselves. The determinants of our destiny lie within ourselves and are subject to our own volitional control. Harmony in any community, whether a small group or a whole society, depends on a shared commitment to ethical conduct. While there can be harmony among thieves, such harmony can only last as long as the thieves are honest with each other. And for this reason, the unity of such groups generally turns out to be short-lived. As philosophers have long recognized, true community depends on a shared commitment to virtue. Since the Buddha held that ethical conduct rests on a foundation of right view, it follows that a modicum of right understanding is critical to fostering a harmonious community. In the present age, however, when the critical method of science has given rise to skepticism about conscious survival of death, it would be presumptuous to insist that a full acceptance of right view, as taught by the Buddha, is necessary as a foundation for social harmony. It seems, though, that social harmony requires at minimum that the members of any group share the conviction that there are objective standards for distinguishing between good and bad conduct, and that there are benefits for the group and its individual members in avoiding the types of behavior generally considered bad, and in living according to standards generally considered good. Several texts testify that the Buddha himself seems to have recognized that morality can be established on the basis of self-reflection and ethical reasoning without requiring a belief in personal survival of death. In Part 1, I have assembled a number of suttas that describe the nature of right view. The texts I have chosen emphasize the view of one's personal responsibility for one's actions, rather than the right view that leads to liberation. Text 1:1 draws a pair of distinctions that run through the Buddha's teachings. The passage begins by highlighting the role of right view as the forerunner of the path, whose first task is to distinguish between wrong view and right view. Thus, right view not only understands the actual nature of things, but it also distinguishes between wrong and right opinions about the nature of things. In this passage, the Buddha describes wrong view with the stock formula for the view of moral nihilism. In defining right view, he draws a second distinction, that between right view that is still subject to the influxes, which is the view of one's ownership of one's actions, and the world-transcending right view that pertains to the Noble Eightfold Path. Right view subject to the influxes, also called mundane right view, distinguishes between the unwholesome and the wholesome. It lays bare the underlying roots of good and bad conduct, and affirms the principles behind the operation of karma, the law of moral causation, which ensures that good and bad deeds eventually produce their appropriate fruits. Although this kind of right view, on its own, does not lead to liberation, it is essential for progress within the cycle of rebirths and serves as the foundation for the world-transcending right view, which eradicates ignorance and the associated defilements. Mundane right view is the understanding of the efficacy of karma. Through mundane right view, one understands that unwholesome karma, deeds arisen from impure motives, eventually redound upon oneself and bring suffering, a bad rebirth, and spiritual deterioration. Conversely, one understands that wholesome karma, deeds arisen from virtuous motives, leads to happiness, a fortunate rebirth, and spiritual progress. In text 1:2, the Venerable Sariputta enumerates the courses of unwholesome karma and their underlying roots, as well as the courses of wholesome karma and their roots. Unwholesome karma is explicated by way of the 10 courses of unwholesome action. The roots of unwholesome karma, the motives from which it originates, are greed, hatred, and delusion. In contrast, wholesome karma is explicated by way of the 10 courses of wholesome action, which include the right view of karma and its fruits. The wholesome roots are said to be non-greed, non-hatred, and non-delusion, which may be expressed more positively as generosity, loving-kindness, and wisdom. Text 1:3 offers a more detailed analysis of karma. In this passage, the Buddha declares that the essential factor in the creation of karma is volition or intention, cetana. For it is the intention that imparts to the action its moral quality. He also explains the diversity of karma by way of its capacity to lead to rebirth in different realms of existence. These are the 5 destinations, according to the cosmology of early Buddhism. Unwholesome karma leads to rebirth in the 3 lower realms, the hells, the animal realm, and the realm of afflicted spirits. Wholesome karma brings rebirth in the 2 higher realms, the human world and the Deva world or heavens. Karma is further differentiated according to the period in which it comes to fruition. Some actions bear their fruit in this life itself. Others are bound to bring results in the next life. And still others are capable of ripening in any life subsequent to the next one. Further clarification on the operation of karma is provided by text 1:4, in which the Buddha explains to a Brahmin the 3 clear knowledges he attained on the night of his enlightenment. The second was the knowledge of the divine eye, with which he could directly see how beings passed from death to new birth in accordance with their karma. Those who engage in misconduct pass on to states of misery. Those who engage in good conduct pass on to happy states. The general principle that emerges from this account is the close correlation between our deeds and their results. Across the gap of lifetimes, karma bears fruits that mirror the original deeds from which they spring. Thus, those who take life create karma that leads to a short lifespan. Those who protect life create karma that leads to a long lifespan. A similar principle holds sway over other types of action. While the Buddha promoted ethics on the basis of the view of the moral efficacy of action, the principle that good actions lead to desirable results and bad actions to undesirable results, he also offered independent grounds for the ethical life. Thus, while recognizing the law of karma serves as an incentive for moral behavior, acceptance of karmic causation is not necessary as a justification for ethics. The need for ethical behavior can be established on other grounds that do not presuppose a belief in post-mortem survival. These grounds can be reached through personal reflection. In the Kalama Sutta, cited in part here as text 1:5, the Buddha asks the Kalamas of Ksa Puttad, who were uncertain whether there is an afterlife, to suspend judgments about such matters and to recognize directly for themselves by self-reflection that acting on the basis of greed, hatred, and delusion leads to harm and suffering for oneself and others, while, in contrast, freeing the mind of greed, hatred, and delusion, and acting in beneficent ways, brings well-being and happiness to both oneself and others. In another sutta, again partly cited here at text 1:6, the Buddha grounds the basic types of right action, such as abstaining from killing and stealing, on a course of moral reflection, by which one places oneself in the position of others. and decides how to act. After considering how one would feel if others were to treat oneself in such ways. Although the Buddha is here responding to a question about the means to a heavenly rebirth, he does not expressly ground moral injunctions on the law of karma or survival of death, but on the principle of reciprocity. This principle, explained in detail here, is succinctly expressed by a verse in the Dhammapada. All beings tremble at violence. All fear death. Putting oneself in the place of another, one should not kill or cause another to kill. Verse 129.